Thanks for joining me, Joe. A happy Friday to you. During our last continuing education event, you were discussing the change management model, and you made a statement that really struck out to me. You said that in order for change to be effective, and in order for the process to be effective, people need to be unified in purpose, but diversified in perspective. Can you elaborate that a little bit for me?
Sure, and it's good to see you, Jess. Happy Friday to you as well. Yeah, it's one of the most essential business philosophies because in order to have different practices that are uniform and consistent with the end goals of the organization, you have to understand what the end goals are. And if you have many different business units, and Jack Welch is one of the pioneers of a phrase very similar to that, when he said GE serves to operate under a common mission, but because we have so many different businesses, they need to operate in their own way to accomplish it. And we need to be open to learning from others so that no business unit knows everything. We have to be susceptible to learning other things. So when I say unified in purpose, I mean, do you understand the true nature of the business? Do you understand who you're really serving? Do you understand what benefit you offer from their perspective? And what are some of the things that you can agree to disagree about? Because in the end, you'll have a better product having had dissent in your debates. If you all agree on going down the same road, it doesn't mean that you'll find success. It means collectively you could end up at failure. Agreement is not a solution.
Can you speak to that a little bit more, the dissent in debates?
Okay, so if it is very healthy, there are two types of conflict in every organization. A relationship conflict based on personalities and personal opinions, and then a task or project conflict. So the saying unified in purpose, diversified in perspective, doesn't mean that we do a lot of personality profiles and I figure out you're an INTJ if you're using Myers-Briggs and I'm a ENFP and we have to get along. It's not about that. It's not about the emotions and the affections. It's about how do we get work done? And you have an opinion for what works. I have an opinion for what works. Neither one of us has a monopoly on the only thing that works. And so we're always better getting together to flesh out the things you don't know and I don't know, and collectively we'll learn them together. Then we can put a process in place to make sure we don't fall headlong into the errors that were going to be there because we were blind to the possibility they were there. Dissent encourages a different perspective.
So how does a company facilitate this conversation and then manage it so it doesn't get out of control?
It's a terrific question, and a lot of companies can't. They will say, hey, we need to be open. We need to air our opinions, put them out there. We need to make sure everybody has a voice and says something. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. You cannot encourage people who are in some way intimidated, who believe there might be some recrimination if they say the wrong thing in a meeting. They're going to be silent, and silence eventually leads to our failure. So one of the ways to do it is very deliberately and constructively give somebody permission at the meeting you're having, project or task planning meeting, to be the devil's advocate. It's called the assigned devil's advocate role. Now you have to give them permission, and then you have to hold them responsible for using their role during the meeting. So if I said, hey, Jessica, at our next project meeting, I need you to be the assigned devil's advocate. And by the way, you want to rotate that role so no one in the organization is always the assigned devil's advocate, because then people learn to not invite them to meetings. They learn how to avoid them. And trust me, it happens. It's human nature. And they'll say, well, we called them and they couldn't show up. And so people, if they're really in support of something, they're so in support of it that they don't see they're blind to things that could possibly fail. We are, according to neuroscientists, all sufferers of the optimism bias. Everything's going to work out, and we tend to overestimate our capabilities, and we tend to underestimate the challenges. Well, that's what you want the assigned devil's advocate to do. So their role, and I have worked with companies that script it. Every time somebody says something like this, well, we just don't have the resources for that. And another person says, hey, we'll find the resources, we'll make it happen. Devil's advocate says, no, that's a platitude. What we're going to do is we're going to right now discuss how we need to get those resources, and we're not moving forward until we solve the resource question. And you can see somebody saying, well, yeah, but we can worry about that later. Let's just go ahead and plan it, and we'll find the resources. Okay, devil's advocate is the speed bump. Their job is to say, we're not moving forward. Here's what we're going to do. We might have to delay the decision and come back later when you have information. But why waste any minutes in this meeting continuing to talk about something that's so uncertain? We're not going to do it. And so they really have a role for halting the conversation and forcing people to use a reasonable argument when there is one, rather than just using emotions to sway it. So sign devil's advocates also not only are scripted, but I said earlier, and this is important, they need to have permission. You see, we'll say at a meeting, hey, everybody, if you see something that we're doing wrong, speak up. Well, you have universal permission to speak up, so nobody's going to do it. It's not going to happen. You need to specifically assign somebody to have permission to be the point at which we're going to stop and discuss, the point at which we're not going to move forward, and they have it. It's not the manager in the room. It's not the highest ranking officer in the room. It is the person who's the assigned devil's advocate. And I'll tell you what, it works wonderful when it is done deliberately.
So that sounds like a part of a larger cultural attitude, that the culture needs to be one where people are not going to get in trouble for speaking up.
Yes.
And they need to feel supported in that dialogue. Yes. What does that look like? How does a leader in an organization facilitate that attitude?
Great question. And it goes back to that unified in purpose, diversified in perspective. The leader has to know absolutely what they own, and then they have to know what they need the team to be involved in. And so if a leader says, you know what, I'm not even going to tell them the direction we're going. We're not going to have a mission. We're not going to have a purpose for what we're doing. We're going to let the team decide that. I'll see you in a couple of years when you're still talking about it, because that's never going to happen. They will endlessly debate the mountain they want to climb, and they're never going to climb it because nobody pointed it out to them. People really are looking for leadership. They want a sense of direction. They don't want you to plan everything they're taking with them on the trip, because then there's no ownership. If the people who are taking that trip have absolutely no skin in the decisional game, then what's in it for them? It's your idea, not my idea. Oh, no, by the way, you told me how many steps to take and where we're going and what to bring with me. So, you know, all I've got to do is relax and go along as a co-pilot. That doesn't serve a team well. So the best example I can tell you is from history, and it's when Dwight D. Eisenhower, having employed the same strategy to figure out which beaches we were going to invade and which dates that was going to happen on, he did that by private consultation with his generals, knowing that you would open up a can of worms of arguments if you got strong personalities in the room and said, so what do you guys think? You don't want to know what they think, because what one person thinks, the other one's going to endlessly debate 100 different reasons why it's a bad idea, but not if you do it privately. So the leader gathers the information from experts, then he or she makes the decision. And having made the decision on the destination, you get your team together and say, hey, here's where we're going, and here's why I believe it's right. Now, how do we best get there? Now, notice what's not on the table. You don't allow them to make a decision on the destination. They don't even know they don't have a role in the destination. They get excited because they see some point that they can go to, and now they get to be involved in how we're going to get there. So everybody's got ownership in the process. He built the interstate highway system the same way. Imagine 48 governors, knowing politicians as you do, with all their constituents back home, being told, we're going to have an interstate highway system that's going to improve commerce in the United States. I'm going to tell you, no matter how great that idea sounds, there were a host of them that hated it. What's in it for me, and What Maryland gets out of it isn't what Alabama's going to get out of it, and it's not fair because Washington's all the way out there. So he ignored that, and what he did was he said, hey, folks, we're going to have an interstate highway system. Now, how do you think that ought to be built, and what should it look like? That's a leader, and that's what you have to have, because consensus is not a decision-making tool.
So that seems to be a change in thought process for a lot of modern business thinking. You know, I can remember being brought in, hey, here's the idea, here's what we're doing, how do we get there? And I can recall being in meetings where we just spun. Everybody wants everybody involved. So how do companies facilitate that initial change? What would you say is step number one in order for a company to change their way of thinking to incorporate a thought process like this?
Good. Yeah, and I would say it starts with the challenge you're trying to overcome. So there's got to be a reason for change. Change for the sake of change isn't improvement. So if that change is going to lead to improvement, you've got to pick a topic people are interested in improving. And it could be the way you deliver your service or goods. It could be the type of goods or service you deliver. It could be, anything to do with getting something out the door or getting people in the door, whichever way. So what's your challenge? Start with that. What are we trying to accomplish? Secondly, it is healthy to get in those meetings where you can brainstorm different ideas, just throw something up at the wall. But here's the problem. We've been doing that now for about 2 decades. And people can see when it's a futile waste of time. And the reason is, I have a saying that empowerment without enlightenment leads to futility. Now, a leader will say, hey, we're going to empower you to make some decisions. But he or she doesn't enlighten them as to what the limits are, what the boundaries are, what the X factors are. That means the things you absolutely cannot be crazy about throwing up on the board, because legally, regulatorily, you can't do those. So why are you discussing them? So the leader has to kind of throw the destination out there with some limits. Hey, we need to accomplish this. We don't know specifically how we're going to get there. That's up to us as a team. But here's what absolutely we have to do. We have to meet this regulation. We have to meet this legal requirement. And so at least give them something so they're not just wasting their time walking down rabbit trails and on paths to the bridge to nowhere. It doesn't work for them.
Right. Well, thank you for sitting down with me this morning. I think this is a good starting topic for us to potentially address at our next continuing education event. So yes, don't be surprised if between now and the end of March, I come up with some more questions for you that kind of dig along this line here. So I think you've given some initial thought process for people who may have never addressed this before or even gone down this line of thought. So thank you,
thank you
for your time this morning.
Well, thank you for your time, and thanks for asking the questions.